Now when it comes to paint stripping, there's a number of different ways to do it. You can scrape it off, you can burn it off, or you can use something like a chemical stripper. Now, in days gone by, Nitromors was the chemical stripper, the go-to product for every professional decorator. But what happened was that we have this thing called methylene chloride, which is a pretty nasty substance, to be fair, and it was decided by the EU and all the rest of it, but I've got no argument with that, decided that they actually wanted to get rid of that ingredient from the paint stripper because it was linked to cancer and all sorts of other things. So not a bad thing, got to protect our health, but what people found is that it wasn't half as effective as the old formulation. The formulation with the nasty stuff in did actually strip paint a lot faster. Nitromors has tweaked it, they've played around with it, and when I first reviewed this I was very underwhelmed with it. Let's have a look and see how this new super strength works. And just for good measure, I'm going to put it up against a much cheaper version, which is the no nonsense paint stripper from Screwfix. So let's find out whether this is any good, and let's also find out how it stacks up against a cheaper product. So I'm going to do half this door. This half, the left hand side, is going to be done with a Nitromors product, and then on the right I'm going to use the no nonsense. Now it does say that what you should do is stipple it on, not brush it out, so leave plenty of stripper on that surface. No good for plastics, by the way. Don't try and use it on plastics. Read the instructions, because there's a few things that it doesn't work very well on. And I've got to say, it works better on oil-based paint and varnish than it does on a water-based product. So let's give it a go. Now, rather intriguingly, in the instructions, it talks about different layers and so on, and how you know how many layers of paint there are on a door before you start working with it, I would not know. But what it also says is don't use it in direct sunlight, because if this stuff evaporates before it's actually had a chance to do its work, you're obviously not going to succeed. What we used to do back in the old days is put it on, and if it was a windy day or a sunny day, we would cover it with a sheet of newspaper. Just press a sheet of newspaper onto it. That actually slowed down the evaporation, so formed a kind of poultice. It's a gel substance, so it's supposed to be good for vertical surfaces. It smells like the old product, I've got to say. The fumes are there, so use it in a well ventilated room. Obviously I've got a mask on here. If it strips paint, it can't be that nice, can it? So what they say in the instructions, to leave it for 5 to 10 minutes, and we will start to see it blister up. And after that, what they're saying is then put another coat on over the top of that without actually removing the blistered paint. Stab another coat of the stripper onto it. And what I'm also going to do now is I'm going to get the other one out, the no nonsense product from Screwfix, and I'm going to put that on this side. It's not going to be a race, we'll just see how it goes, but intriguingly on the no nonsense product, it does talk about leaving it on for an hour and then scraping it off and then applying another coat if that coat didn't do the job, or didn't take it all off. So there's a slight difference. They're saying this one's a bit faster. The no nonsense are saying leave it a bit longer. A slight difference in the approach. Okay, so first thing to say is this doesn't have much of a smell, not like the Nitromors. I'm just going to say, if you're pouring this into a container, I'm using an old milk bottle here, and what we don't want is someone to come along and say, oh look, is that a nice bit of yogurt or milk or whatever, chuck it in your tea. Whenever you decant things and you put them in something left lying around, you've got to be very careful that nobody picks it up. Same game, gel-like structure. We don't brush it out, we just stab it on there. We'll see how it goes. It does actually give you a coverage rate for this, which is 1 litre per square metre. But I've got to say that rather depends how many coats of paint there are on the surface you're trying to strip. The other way to strip paint that I haven't mentioned is that you can actually send it away for dipping. So people take their doors off and they send them away, and a guy strips them all down, and then when they get the doors back they find that it's also eaten all the glue and the door falls apart. So you've got to be aware of that. Sometimes when you strip things it dries the wood out too much, takes all the oils out the wood, and you start finding you've got great big splits in it. This they're saying leave for an hour until you start doing anything. So the Nitromors over here, this has had 5 minutes and it's not doing anything. So let's give it 10 minutes. Let's go have a cup of tea and return to the scene of the crime. This has actually had 15 minutes now and it is blistering up a few areas where it hasn't actually done very much at all. So what I'm going to do now is give it another coat, stab some more in there and then give it a little bit more time, see what happens. So I've given this Nitromors another coat now and left it for a little time. So let's see if it deals with this bit of black gunge that's here. Well, it's coming off reasonably cleanly, I suppose. And I think you'd finish it off with a bit of steel wool once you've just got most of it off. But it's still not what I'd call impressive. Now, let's go over to the no nonsense here, and this has had plenty of time and I've actually fed a little bit more into this to give it another coat and see how it goes. That other coat's been on about 20 minutes, so all in all an hour and a half on this one. Well, it's going to be hard work, quite honestly. It's going to get there. It will get there if I give it enough coats, but it's not easy. So that's two chemicals we've used. Now, I started off by saying, is the Nitromors as effective as the old one? Definitely not, nowhere near. They've actually formulated to give it a bit more fizz, a bit more bubble. It's better than it was, I'd say, but it's still not a convincing way of taking off paint, and it proves very expensive because I've already used half of that can just on this small area here. So cost is one factor, but the other thing is we've got to think about lead paint. We don't want to be disturbing lead paint unless we have to. And what I would say is when you undertake a paint stripping job, think about why you're doing it. Because I made that mistake years ago. There was perfectly good lead paint on my house and the bit that I left was still good 20 years later, whereas the bits I stripped off and then recoated with a modern paint, I've had to do those about 3 or 4 times. If you've got a good layer of paint on there, sometimes all you need is a good primer, get rid of any blistering bits and then wash it down and you're ready to go with a fresh coat of paint. But it's not always necessary to strip. If you want that plain wood look, then fine, you're going to have to strip the whole thing back. But quite honestly, when you're talking about exterior joinery, that plain wood look, is the UV soon gets to it and damages it. So let's have a look at another method which I prefer, which is to use a heat gun. This one was just over £20. You pick these up from Screwfix or Toolstation. They do a good job. The only things you've got to be careful of is if it's lead paint, you don't want to be warming that up. So when you're using a heat gun, just be mindful of the fact that you want good ventilation. Put yourself a mask on and just, you know, be careful. The other thing is if you scorch the wood, then you have to sand that down. Do not try and repaint on scorched wood because the paint will just peel off. All that scorching has to come off. So if you're careful, you can avoid scorching it. So my conclusion is that the chemicals that you can buy as a DIYer aren't really up to the job. There are stronger products which are available through specialist trade outlets really, but you really don't want to be using those because they are bad for your health. You need to take all kinds of precautions to use them. One good alternative, by the way, is something called Peelaway, which you put on and then you put the poultice over the top and you leave it there for days on end, and then when you peel it off, the whole lot in theory comes away. I've used that with great success in the past, but if you're a DIYer and you're just nipping down to your decorating store, grabbing a tin of Nitromors, sadly, it's not going to do what it did. I'm Roger Bisbee. Thanks very much for watching. Come back and see us soon. We'll be slagging more products off.